On September 14th, 2023, the Chinese container ship Tian'en completed a commercial transit through Russia's Northern Sea route from Qingdao to Hamburg in 19 days. The same journey through the Suez Canal would have taken 34 days. That 15-day difference, that 3,000 nautical mile savings, represents something far more significant than fuel efficiency. It represents the opening of a shipping corridor that has been frozen shut for all of recorded human history. And as the ice recedes, it's revealing not just shorter routes, but a geopolitical competition zone where economics, military power, and resource control are converging in ways that echo conflicts from a century ago. This is the story of the ice curtain. Since 1979, Arctic sea ice extent has declined by approximately 13% per decade during summer months, according to NASA's National Snow and Ice Data Center. In 1979, virtually zero commercial cargo ships transited the Northern Sea route along Russia's northern coast. By 2013, 71 ships made the journey. In 2025, that number reached 103 transits, carrying 3.2 million tons of cargo. The route from Rotterdam to Shanghai via the Northern Sea route covers approximately 12,800 kilometers compared to 20,000 kilometers through Suez. That's a 36% reduction in distance, which for shipping companies operating on margins where every day at sea costs $30,000 to $50,000, transforms route planning calculations entirely. But major Western carriers aren't rushing north despite the economics. MSC and Maersk, two of the world's largest container lines, have explicitly rejected Arctic routing for their core operations. The reason isn't ice, it's infrastructure control. Russia's state nuclear corporation, Rosatom, operates the Northern Sea Route Administration, which charges escort fees ranging from $300,000 to $700,000 per transit, depending on vessel size and ice conditions. Every ship transiting Russian Arctic waters requires icebreaker escort, and Russia controls every icebreaker capable of providing it. This creates a dependency that Western logistics companies view as unacceptable strategic risk. One nationalized cargo seizure, one diplomatic freeze, one arbitrary rule change, and billions in goods sit trapped in ice with no alternative routing. This isn't theoretical concern, it's pattern recognition. In 2018, a Chinese state-owned construction firm bid to build 3 airports in Greenland, Nuuk, Ilulissat, and Qaqortoq, with a total estimated cost of $560 million. The company was China Communications Construction Company, the same firm that built ports across Africa and Asia under Belt and Road Initiative financing. Denmark and the United States intervened immediately. The concern wasn't civilian aviation, it was dual-use infrastructure. Runways that accommodate cargo planes can accommodate military transports, and airports that serve tourists can serve intelligence collection platforms. Denmark offered $109 million for a 33% stake in Kallalit Airports, the state company managing the projects, effectively pricing China out of the bidding. The move triggered a political crisis in Greenland. The pro-independence party Nalarik quit the ruling coalition, viewing Danish intervention as colonial overreach. But the strategic calculus was clear. Greenland sits 750 miles from Thule Air Base, renamed Patuffik Space Base in 2023, which houses early warning radars tracking ballistic missile launches from Russia, North Korea, and China. Chinese-controlled infrastructure operating within intelligence collection range of those systems represented unacceptable risk to U.S. military planners. By 2025-2026, China's footprint in Greenland was residual. No mines operational, no infrastructure built, no controlling equity positions in resource projects. This outcome reflects a pattern. When Western powers perceive strategic threats in Arctic infrastructure development, capital finds ways to outmaneuver competitors, regardless of project economics. The Great Game, the 19th century British-Russian competition for influence in Central Asia, offers a historical parallel worth examining. From roughly 1830 to 1895, Britain and Russia maneuvered for control over Afghanistan, Persia, and the Central Asian Khanites without ever fighting direct military conflict between their empires. They used infrastructure development, trade agreements, diplomatic pressure, and proxies to establish spheres of influence in a region neither could afford to lose, but neither wanted to risk major war to control. The competition ended with the 1895 Pamir Boundary Commission protocols, which simply drew lines on maps defining where Russian influence stopped and British influence began. The Arctic in 2026 shows similar dynamics. Major powers positioning for advantage in a region becoming accessible through climate change, using economic leverage and infrastructure control rather than military confrontation, competing over geography that connects their strategic interests. Russia's Arctic strategy follows this pattern with methodical precision. Since 2007, Moscow has invested over $150 billion in Arctic infrastructure: ports, icebreakers, military bases, and resource extraction facilities. The Yamal LNG project, a joint venture between Russian company Novatek, France's Total Energies, and Chinese investors CNPC and Silk Road Fund, began production in 2017. It now produces approximately 16.5 million tons of liquefied natural gas annually, shipped through Arctic waters year-round using ARC-C7 ice-class tankers. That's real infrastructure producing real energy that flows into global markets, and every ton moves through waters Russia claims as its northern sea route. Russia's icebreaker fleet underpins this control, 46 vessels total, including 7 nuclear-powered icebreakers. The United States, by comparison, operates exactly 3 icebreakers, USCGC Polar Star, USCGC Healy, and USCGC Storis, with only Polar Star and Healy capable of reaching high Arctic regions. On September 5, 2025, Russia commissioned the Project 23550 armed icebreaker Ivan Papanin during a flag-raising ceremony at Severomorsk, headquarters of the Northern Fleet. This vessel represents a category that didn't exist in modern naval architecture until Russia created it, the combat icebreaker. Project 23550 displaces 8,500 tons, stretches 114.5 meters, and carries RC-7 ice class rating, meaning it can break through ice 1.7 meters thick year-round. It mounts a 76 SME AK-176 SME naval gun, the same weapon fitted to Russian corvettes, capable of engaging surface, air, and ground targets up to 9 miles away. The ship also carries 12.1 mm heavy machine guns, portable air defense systems, and capacity for 8 Kalibr or Uran cruise missiles and containerized launchers. It operates a helicopter, a hovercraft, and 2 high-speed pursuit boats. The Ivan Papanin's mission profile includes protecting maritime economic zones, escorting detained vessels, logistic support, search and rescue operations, and armed patrol of the northern sea route. A second vessel, Nikolai Zubov, launched in December 2024 and is expected to enter service in 2026. 2 additional ships, Perga and Dzerzhinsky, are under construction for Russia's FSB border guard service. Mark Kansian, former Marine Corps officer and analyst at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, stated, "This represents a break from the tradition that icebreakers were scientific or transport vessels, not warships. The vessel's deployment raises a doctrinal question that Western navies are struggling to answer. How do you respond to armed platforms operating in a domain where you lack equivalent capability?" The U.S. Coast Guard is exploring an Arctic security cutter program, but production timelines stretch years into the future. Canada operates the Harry D. Wolfe-class Arctic patrol vessels. Norway has the Svalbard class, and Denmark is planning successors to the Thetis-class offshore patrol vessels. But none match the combination of icebreaking capability and firepower that Project 23550 represents. On February 11, 2026, NATO announced the launch of Arctic Sentry, a coordinated surveillance and intelligence sharing initiative focused on monitoring military activity in Arctic waters. The program integrates satellite reconnaissance, maritime patrol aircraft, and undersea sensors to track Russian and Chinese naval movements through northern passages. It represents acknowledgement that the Arctic has transitioned from a region of scientific cooperation to a domain of strategic competition. The insurance industry is pricing this transition with brutal clarity. War risk premiums, the additional insurance costs for vessels transiting conflict zones or areas with elevated geopolitical tension, have become a factor in Arctic route economics. Standard war risk premiums for high threat areas currently run between 0.5% and 1% of hull value, with rates for areas like the Strait of Hormuz reaching 0.2% of vessel value per transit after a 60% increase in 2025. The Red Sea, following Houthi attacks on shipping, saw premiums spike to 0.75 per 1% of hull value, representing increases of 400% over 2023 levels. Arctic transits don't yet carry Red Sea level premiums, but underwriters are monitoring Russia's armed icebreaker deployments and adjusting risk models accordingly. A container ship valued at $100 million transiting the Northern Sea route might face war risk premiums adding $50,000 to $100,000 per voyage if insurers classify Russian-controlled waters as elevated geopolitical risk. That cost negates much of the fuel savings from shorter routing, which explains why major Western carriers continue avoiding the passage despite the distance advantage. The economic calculation isn't just about current premium rates, it's about exposure to arbitrary rate increases should tensions escalate. In September 2025, the Dutch general cargo vessel Thamesborg ran aground on a shoal in Canada's Northwest Passage and remained stuck for over a month before icebreakers refloated it. The incident highlighted infrastructure gaps. The nearest capable icebreaker was Canadian Coast Guard ship Louis S. Saint-Laurent, which took days to reach the grounded vessel's position. In Russian Arctic waters, Rosatom-operated nuclear icebreakers can typically respond within 24-48 hours, a response time enabled by the $150 billion infrastructure investment Russia has made. This creates an asymmetry. Russia can guarantee transit security and emergency response within its territorial waters, while North American Arctic waters offer neither equivalent infrastructure nor comparable response capability. China's role in Arctic development follows a carefully calibrated strategy that Beijing calls its Polar Silk Road. In a 2018 white paper, China declared itself a near-Arctic state, despite being located 900 miles from the Arctic Circle. The designation justifies Chinese participation in Arctic governance forums, resource development projects, and infrastructure investments. China has commissioned 4 polar-capable research vessels: Xuelong, Xuelong 2, Tansuo 1, and Jidi. These aren't icebreakers. They're ice-strengthened research platforms conducting oceanographic surveys, mineral prospecting, and route mapping. Chinese and Russian naval forces have conducted joint patrols in the Bering Sea off Alaska with increasing frequency since 2022. In August 2023, 11 Chinese and Russian warships operated together near the Aleutian Islands, the largest such combined flotilla ever recorded in that region. The operational message: China doesn't need Arctic territory to project presence in Arctic waters if Russia permits access. This partnership creates complications for Western strategic planning because it's not zero-sum competition. It's burden sharing between powers with aligned interests in challenging U.S.-dominated maritime norms. The resource dimension compounds these dynamics. The U.S. Geological Survey's 2008 Arctic assessment estimated 90 billion barrels of undiscovered oil, 169 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, and 44 billion barrels of natural gas liquids in Arctic regions. That represents approximately 13% of the world's undiscovered oil and 30% of undiscovered natural gas. Rare earth elements critical for battery production, electric vehicle motors, and defense electronics are also present in significant Arctic deposits. Greenland alone holds an estimated 38.5 million tons of rare earth oxides in the Kvanefjeld deposit near Narsok in southern Greenland. Current global rare earth production is approximately 280,000 tons annually, meaning Greenland's single largest deposit could theoretically supply global demand for over a century. China currently produces about 60% of the world's rare earths and processes, over 90%, creating chokepoint leverage in supply chains for everything from F-35 fighter jets to Tesla batteries. A Western-controlled rare earth mine in Greenland would represent strategic diversification from Chinese supply dominance. But developing such mines requires infrastructure, ports, power generation, housing for workers, roads that Greenland lacks and cannot afford to build without outside investment. This returns to the 2018 airport problem. Greenland needs capital for development. China offers capital. Western powers intervene to block it, and Greenland's resources remain undeveloped while the strategic competition plays out. President Trump's renewed interest in acquiring Greenland, first expressed in 2019 and reiterated in December 2024 and January 2026, reflects this calculus. Trump has stated that U.S. control over Greenland is a necessity for national security, without ruling out military force to achieve it. The practical mechanisms for such acquisition, outright purchase, 99-year lease, territorial status arrangement, or compact granting defense and infrastructure rights, remain unspecified. But the strategic logic is clear. Deny China access to Greenland's geography and resources, while securing American influence over approaches to North America through Arctic waters. Denmark, which maintains sovereignty over Greenland under home rule arrangements, has rejected any discussion of territorial transfer. But Denmark cannot indefinitely fund Greenland's development needs. The autonomous territory receives approximately $600 million annually in subsidies from Copenhagen, while blocking investments from powers that could provide capital at scale. The economic pressures and strategic imperatives are pushing towards some resolution, though what form that takes remains uncertain. Shipping economics provide the clearest indicator of how this competition will develop in the near term. In 2025, the Northern Sea Route handled 103 transits carrying 3.2 million tons of cargo. The Suez Canal, by comparison, handles approximately 19,000 transits annually carrying over 1 billion tons. The Arctic is not replacing traditional shipping lanes. It's adding optionality for specific cargo types, where savings justify elevated risk. LNG carriers, bulk commodity vessels, and point-to-point industrial shipments represent the most likely traffic categories for Arctic growth. Containerized consumer goods moving from Asian manufacturing centers to European markets will likely continue favoring Suez despite longer distance, because container logistics depend on hub and spoke networks that Arctic routing doesn't support efficiently. But 5 to 10% of global shipping tonnage migrating to Arctic routes would represent massive strategic and economic shift, particularly for chokepoint states like Egypt, which earns approximately $8 or $9 billion annually in Suez Canal revenues. Russia's leverage increases proportionally with traffic volume. More ships transiting means more escort fees, more port calls at Russian Arctic facilities, more economic dependence on Moscow's goodwill for passage. Climate projections suggest the Arctic Ocean could experience ice-free summers by the 2030s or 2040s, though exact timing remains uncertain. If that occurs, the Northern Sea Route becomes navigable without icebreaker escort for 3 to 4 months annually, fundamentally changing the economics. Rosatom escort fees disappear for summer transits, eliminating Russia's ability to extract monopoly rent during peak shipping season. This creates a perverse incentive structure. Russia benefits most from Arctic conditions that require icebreaker dependence, not from fully open waters. The militarization of Arctic infrastructure, armed icebreakers, expanded naval bases, long-range surveillance systems, makes strategic sense when viewed through this economic lens. Control enforced through presence beats. Control enforced through geography, especially when geography is melting. The United States, Canada, and Finland signed the Icebreaker Collaboration Effort, ICE Pact, Memorandum of Understanding in November 2024. The agreement commits the three nations to sharing research, knowledge, and capabilities in building polar icebreakers to counter Russian and Chinese Arctic expansion. Specific vessel numbers and production timelines remain undefined, but the intent is clear: develop Western icebreaker capacity to match Russian capabilities. The challenge is industrial. Russia has been building icebreakers continuously for decades, maintaining shipyard expertise, supply chains, and specialized engineering knowledge. Western shipyards lack this continuity. The last U.S. heavy icebreaker, USCGC Polar Star, was commissioned in 1976. Rebuilding that industrial base requires not just funding, but time, and time is the resource Arctic competition is eliminating. By the time Western icebreaker programs reach production scale in the early 2030s, Russia will have operated combat icebreakers in the Arctic for nearly a decade, establishing operational patterns and precedents that become difficult to challenge. The Great Game ended in 1907 with the Anglo-Russian Convention, which defined spheres of influence and ended the strategic competition over Central Asia. The convention worked because both powers recognized that the costs of continued rivalry outweighed the benefits of undefined competition. The ice curtain may follow a similar trajectory, not resolution through confrontation, but through negotiated recognition of realities. Russia controls the infrastructure, Russia has the icebreakers, Russia has made the investments, and geography places the Northern Sea Route within Russian territorial waters or exclusive economic zones for most of its length. Western powers can contest this through capability development and legal challenges, but the operational advantages Russia has built are material and growing. The question becomes whether to compete indefinitely in a domain where Russia holds structural advantages, or whether to negotiate access terms that acknowledge Russian primacy while preserving Western economic interests and security requirements. Neither option is politically palatable, which is why the current approach, incremental capability building, symbolic presence operations, and alliance coordination, continues by default. But defaults are not strategies, and the Arctic is not waiting for Western powers to decide. The ice is melting, the routes are opening, the infrastructure is being built, and the rules governing this new geography are being written by those present to write them. On January 15, 2026, a Russian Ministry of Natural Resources official announced plans to increase Northern Sea Route cargo volumes to 150 million tons annually by 2030. That figure, nearly 50 times current traffic levels, represents aspiration more than projection. But it reveals Moscow's strategic intent. The Northern Sea Route is not an alternative to global shipping networks. It's a leverage point in negotiations over everything from sanctions to energy exports to sphere of influence agreements. And leverage, once established through infrastructure and presence, becomes extraordinarily difficult to dislodge without costs no one wants to pay. The ice curtain is rising not with walls but with icebreakers, not with barriers but with escort fees, not with territorial conquest but with patient accumulation of advantages in a domain others ignored until the ice began to melt. By the time Western powers recognized the strategic implications, Russia had already built the infrastructure, deployed the platforms, and established the operational patterns that will shape Arctic competition for decades to come.